Okay, we should be live. Hello, Brisbane and the world. You're with BrisJS. Thank you very much for joining us tonight for another one of our live streams. Second one for 21. Yeah, we're hopefully you're seeing us all on the live chat, and everything's coming through really well. Do shout out if that's not happening for you. Just wait to see everyone come through and connect. And while we wait, I'm just going to show the Slido link. You can visit slido.com and you can punch in that particular ID, 221, and that should bring you to our Slido poll and Q&A section, and that will allow you to actually join in the conversation, ask questions from our speakers. I'll be doing little speaking rounds after each of the talks. We have 2 talks tonight, and yeah, we'll be able to go through and get some extra information so you can be part of the whole presentation. Hey, there we go. We're starting to see some folks on there. Hi, Chris. Hi, Jimmy. Hello, everyone. That should hopefully be very obvious for everyone. So, okay, let everyone get in. All right, no problem. Yep, starting to see many concurrent people now. All right, let everyone join, and everyone will be able to see on a slight playback delay as well, if they want to. One of the magic features of YouTube Studio. So let's get into it. I'm just going to keep with the presentation. Cool. I'm going to do a bit of a preamble here in case it's your first time at BrisJS. I did mention this is the Slido link that you need. I'm going to be pasting that in the chat as soon as I finished my little preamble. So don't hesitate. Don't worry if you're going to miss that number 221 or any of the links. I'll give you an instant one-click link, and everything should be great. We're going to start our evening off by acknowledging the traditional owners of the site that I'm broadcasting from today, which is the Yugara and Bundjalung people, and I would like to pay my respects to elders past and present. If you would like to, you should go and look up from your particular site where you are right now. We're all working from home, at least a lot of us still are, so I think it's really important to be able to understand you know, the country, the geographical boundaries that have come before us as well. So do have a look into that. Meetup. This is a very old slide, and it's really just there to remind you that if you hit the "you're going" on our particular event, that helps us in a couple of different ways. I can let you know of any mishaps, like postponement, like we've had this particular week. Just give ourselves a bit more time to make sure we can get the organization going. Make sure we can get everyone's schedules lining up, and give you a little bit more notice as well. And that's very helpful there, but also clicking that button, thanks to the Meetup feature of seeing the online link event, gives you the online link to the YouTube channel, to that specific video that I've prepped the placeholder for. So that's handy as well. And it also helps me understand who's interested and who's ready for the upcoming events. And that will carry forward when we start going back into the in-person events. And that will be very helpful there as well. Code of conduct. If you're not aware, there is a code of conduct. It's on the brisjs.org page. That includes our online spaces. You know, this is a harassment-free experience for everyone. So please make yourself aware of the anti-harassment policy, and you know, everyone have fun. Okay, call for presenters. This is one of my most important slides. We cannot do this without folks submitting great talks. And if you've never done a talk before, now is your time. Feel free to go and put that submission together. It's not a big formal process. It's more like a conversation. You can submit an issue on our GitHub page. Very developer-esque, and you can go through and I'll tag it with the right labels and we'll put it into a release, which is a month, and we'll be able to schedule and organize through that. There's a bit of a template. If you go to the present link through BrisJS.org, I also tweet that link out and it will autofill essentially some of the different placeholder details that you've got to provide, such as talk length, title, what month you're targeting and any social contact for you. And please include your name as well. That's very helpful because I'd like to include that in the upcoming speakers list. But yeah, definitely submit your talks. If you've got a talk you'd really like to hear about and it's not an area that you have any experience with to be able to present with, you can do one of two things. You can either go and learn that topic and present it for everyone else, which is an excellent idea, and a lot of people do that as an impetus to grow and learn. But also, you can go and request a talk. So if you put a GitHub issue in there as well, just say that it's a request in there, and I'll mark it as such, and it'll appear on our BrisJS.org page as well as an idea for somebody who want to talk if they're interested in doing a talk at BrisJS. So it goes both ways. Cool. This is a little updated screenshot actually of next month's current preliminary lineup. So this is for the April 2021 meetup. We've got a couple of headlines there: JavaScript and cloud, building microservices with Node.js, building identity platforms with Azure, ADB2C, and MSAL.js. They're trying to test me on my ability to read this out, and Kotlin.js. There's a number of really cool topics coming up there. So we'll make sure that the schedules line up and see what's in there, and you'll be able to see that listed in the meetup page once it's confirmed as well. We've got a number of different social presences. Do keep a lookout. You're obviously on the YouTube right now. Then Twitter is definitely our most active platform. Tweeting out there. Please at BrisJS whenever you'd like to get a question in or you'd like to draw our attention to anything. We're very responsive on Twitter. You can also DM if you're interested and you need any help for preparing a talk. BrisJS.org, still the portal to kind of tie everything together there. You'll find a link that takes you through the meetup page, as well as a couple of different bits of info about presenting, slightly more relevant when it's in person again. Also, some info around some of the past talks, and more importantly, we've got a jobs section. The jobs section is also powered through GitHub issues. I just tag it with the jobs and employment, and anyone can submit this. It's open if you are a member of a company or you run it or anything like that, and you'd like to make sure that somebody in the local community in BrisJS has an opportunity to see that you're hiring and that you'd like those folks to join you. This is a great place to do so. So yeah, go have a look through there. We've got a number of different positions advertised there. There's about 3 new ones in the last month that have been submitted there, and we have a couple of ones that have been open and will continue to be open. And I'll tell you about that in our little sponsored slide section, which is right now. So BrisJS always thanks its sponsors, and at the moment, the thing that we need sponsorship with is this Zoom account that powers the BrisJS Livestream. So that is done through the place that I work at, which is PCCW Global. So PCCW Global has a number of different products. One of them, they're a recognizable brand powered out of good old Brisbane. The Brisbane dev team here is Console Connect. So that product is launched globally, and you should go check it out. PCCW Global has lots and lots of different products and global arms. huge telecommunication backbone, and we provide infrastructure and tooling for not just enterprises and individuals, but entire telecommunications companies and network fabrics extensions as well. So huge company, and we're growing. So a team that I'm part of, so I'm the system architect of this particular team of teams. We'd like to hire some more folks out of Brisbane. So if you're a senior or mid JS web dev, you've got a bit of full stack experience essentially, you may lean slightly more on back end or front end, that doesn't matter. Please chat to us. We'll be able to go through and get some more leveling and some more experience, give you some more info about the position as well. That position is also up on BrisJS job section, so do check it out. And that particular link that you see there, TinyCC Global Jobs, will probably not show you this current position, but there are other positions advertised through there for the same company. But yeah, please check out the brisjs.org, and we'll make sure that we can hook you up. Come join my team. It'd be fantastic. Another great sponsor that we have provides us sort of like the door prize, I guess you could say. In the virtual sense, I assume that's still a door prize. So it's the streaming door prize. We've got I hesitated to provide the December winner last time before I could make sure I could check all the logs and make sure that I could get the emails out. But Louisa Buchanan Adams, thank you very much for your submission in December. You were the winner of that license, as well as last month we had Alan Lima. So hopefully you've all grabbed that license key that I've sent through. We made sure that they were valid after an initial snafu. So that's all good. If you have any questions, do reach out to me personally as well. But I hope you enjoy that, and it really ups the interactive code testing and sort of that REPL style experience that you can get through the cool Wallaby and Quokka tools. So thanks very much to Wallaby. Some cool folks hanging out on the Gold Coast supporting us here, because BrisJS is also Greater Brisbane and Gold Coast, so that's awesome. We'd love to see your support. Thank you very much. And everyone, make sure you submit your answers tonight. I'm going to listen to our speakers and come up with a question, and you will be able to answer that straight away and get your submissions in there. And we'll use the random selection script to pick somebody from that. As long as the answer is valid, do include your email address and name, please, in the answer that you submit. Tonight, we've got a couple of great speakers here. We have some cool topics too. So enjoyable load testing with K6.io. So load testing developers will love. Extremely important topic covered by Andre. How to start your own open source project. This one's great. Starts making this sort of code contribution thing really accessible to everyone. Thank you for submitting this quite last minute. Ashley Davis filling in our speaker slot for tonight. Thank you so much for doing that. And then we'll close, and we'll have plenty of time in between those two for Q&A, as well as at the end, bring everyone on together. Cool. All right. What I will do is I will stop my screen share and introduce our first speaker, Andre. Can I get you to pop your video on and say hello to everyone?
Hello, everyone.
There you are, you're live. Thank you. Welcome, and take it away.
All right. Let's hope. Okay. So a quick agenda. Hopefully, is that sharing? Okay. Is that screen sharing?
I can see PowerPoint.
Oh, good.
Browser.
So quick agenda about me. We're going to talk probably 2 minutes on theory, lots of demos, and then we're going to get into sort of slightly harder examples that you may not find on the internet, but I think are good. So about configurations and extending, and K6 as part of DevOps, and then quickly talk about making life easier. So a little bit about me. Currently, I'm a site reliability engineer at Silverrail. Previously, I've done a bit of cloud and general engineering. Currently working on a personal project called Cryptoroo, which is all about software-defined cryptography. And I needed a load test a few functions of that software. And that's how I came across K6, and that's what I'm going to talk to you guys about. So just a quick talk about what Cryptoroo is all about. So it's basically cryptography as code for DevSecOps, and what I'm hoping to do is simplify the way that we do security in terms of as part of pipelines, because generally security takes a lot of time and it's a lot of hassle, and trying to make it as easy as possible. Daytime, I work for a company called Silverrail. We're also hiring some a couple of junior roles and a couple of senior roles, so check those out. And let's get on with it. Now, when I was planning this course, when I was planning this talk, I actually had a course in mind, but things didn't go to plan. So if this talk feels a little bit like we're just reading the manual, bear with me. The doc's actually quite good, so it should be a pleasant experience. And so because nothing worked, we're just going to use some vanilla examples that K6 has, but the point should come across quite clearly. And the best thing about this talk for me is that it's the first talk I get to actually combine infrastructure and JavaScript. So that is quite rare, but quite fun. All right, so theory. Things go wrong at scale. So when you're developing a bit of software, you do your tests, you do the best you can, but when you go and start doing sort of 100 requests a second or 50 requests a second, all those little things that you may not have time to test. So this was a great picture I borrowed from somebody else's slides. But when you're testing, this is a very controlled sort of world. In your pipelines, you may have a little bit more control, UAT far less, and production may look something like this. So what I'm trying to say here is it can be very, very hard to code effectively for scale, because you never break things on your desktop. You never generate more than 10 requests a second, even if you script it. You never do that, all that kind of stuff. And some of the little subtleties that will get you, things like queues, web servers, will not show up unless you test at scale and you test close to your production scale. So the second question that should really kind of trigger is, what do we actually need? Is it a code problem or infrastructure problem? Now, because we're all living in this whole new world of DevOps, or should be living, it's actually both. And I think part of the reason why I think that load testing, especially accessible load testing and load testing, in my experience, hasn't been as accessible as some of the other sort of parts of development, really does help this whole triangle. I believe that load testing really does sit in this QA, and it does enable both development and operations. And if done well, it can help pick up, little bugs as early as possible and have a reliable experience. One of the things that I have found in the past is that there's a lot of bake-offs. So let's go and talk about not how we compare load testing tools, but what a load testing tool should do. And this is one of those, just reading the manual. So K6 has a really good concept of what they think their manifestos and the 4 key points of a load testing framework should be. And one is any testing is better than no testing. So even the simplest load test on an API endpoint that you know from your monitoring gets hit quite a lot, that identifies things that are going to take you time to fix, is better than doing no testing. So one of the things that I hear a lot of development teams say is, we're not going to do load testing because it's just one of those things that we may do every 3 months. And it's because it's hard to set up, it's hard to troubleshoot. We need to go and choose a tool. So one of the things that K6 does allow us to do is say any testing is better than no testing. Load testing should be goal-oriented. So one of the things that we want to make sure is that if we have contracts or we have desired response times, that we use load testing to test those. And K6 makes it really, really easy to do that with things like thresholds and checks, which we'll talk about very, very soon. Load testing should be loved by developers. So this is one of the things that K6 does quite well. Everything is as code. Every part of the load test is written as code. There's no configuration. Anything you configure is basically JavaScript code, as I will show in the examples. And load testing should be done in the pre-production environment. So the key thing there is that try to do these experiments as real as you can, because the benefit of doing it in maybe a UAT system or something like that is that you may identify poor configurations in your code or infrastructure that won't handle things. And so it's a good thing to do. So second bit of theory, and this is probably the last bit of theory, is the type of load tests we can do. So, one of the things that you can, if you talk to people, you may say, we're going to do a load test, but, there's actually different types of load testing. So there's smoke testing. So, hey, I've made a new change, and all of a sudden, what's going to happen is that the request used to take, 1 second to reply. Now they're taking 10 seconds to reply. That's a quick smoke test. That's not something you have to set up a big load for. But before you push that to production, that is something that you should look out for. Load performance testing. So basically, this is what most people think about when they talk about performance testing. Stress testing and spike testing. So that's for looking at things like, well, how well will our load balancers, how well will our backend scaling work if we go and put a load in? And then endurance testing. I think this is really, really important to do, especially if you try and pick up things like back pressure, whereby you're submitting more requests than the backend can process. It's very, very hard to find that out without doing what they call soak testing. So the key thing really is to basically understand there are different types of tests, and that depending on what you're trying to achieve, you may want to use a different approach. And then K6 as a toolkit allows you to do all of them. Just a quick check that I'm still alive and people can listen. Can you hear me?
You sure are. We're enjoying it.
Cool. So installation, it's probably, apart from, the ability to use JavaScript, one of the best things that I've found about K6 is that it is very, very easy to set up. You go and download a binary, you put it in your environment path, and you start using the command line. So hopefully that is big enough. And if you go K6 help and 2 helps, you will get a bunch of commands. So essentially all I've done is I've downloaded the latest build binary, and I have basically put it into a shared path, and it's basically running. So unlike any other load testing tools, and I've dealt with quite a few, it can be quite hard to set these up. So one of the things they've done really, really well, adhering to their manifesto, is making it very easy for developers to use. All right, demo times. So we're just going to go and run through a whole lot of these demos, and then we're just going to go between the scripts and just have a quick look at the script. And we're not going to dive too much because this is only a 20-minute talk, but hopefully it gets you inspired to go and do some of your own exploring. So basically, to run a test, you give it the path to a JavaScript file, which contains the test data, and it will return for you basically how many times it ran, how many virtual users. So a virtual user is essentially a user that you're simulating, and how many iterations that you've got. So getting started is not that hard with K6. If you go and have a look at some sample files, and you go and have a look at the Git, it is, I couldn't think of a simpler, sorry, let me just go and zoom in. I couldn't think of a simpler load test if I try. Okay, so we've got the first one under our belt. We've done a Git, so let's do something a bit more fancy. Let's go and run a few of these in what's called a batch mode. So basically what we'll do is we'll go and run these. And once again, you can see that we've got these little green things, which we didn't have before. So where did those come from? And what are they actually? So let's go have a quick look. So if we go and have a look at the batch, where are we? This is the downside of making it visible for you, but having to. So what we've done is we basically hit 2 URLs, and then we have this thing called a check. Now, a check, without going too far into it, is basically an assert, but unlike other testing frameworks, a check won't fail a test. But the check will show up in your CLI. So if you're interested in things like, hey, at load time, are we getting the right responses and are we getting the right content? That's what you use a check for. So then the next thing to do is we may want to start getting a bit more complicated with our tests. So let's go and run a longer test. And actually, hey, we've got this new thing. Not only are we getting these checks, we're getting this kind of grouping. And once again, we can see that the average request durations, things like that are working. But what is this grouping? And where that's coming from really is it's coming from the fact that when we are doing the grouping, we can also use this group kind of function to basically group a bunch of different checks. This is a very, very high level overview, and I'm going through this quite fast. I'm not going to cover the basics because if you go and read the documentation, it's quite enjoyable to read. But what I'm trying to do is just kind of show you that the tick boxes are being ticked. So the last thing you want to do is you may want to say, well, how do I actually tailor my testing experience? So what you'll see here is this is a 15-second test, and what you'll see is that after a while, this will go up to more and more users, and it will go down between users. And the way we do that is is basically using something called, sorry, give me 1 minute. Too many stages. Too many things open. So the concept of a stage is we may want to go and run tests in a different sort of thing. So we may want to spike up, we may want to spike down, we may want to have a long sort of thing. So once again, you define it as a software, and then you do your ramping up and down. So that's kind of enough to be dangerous with K6. As you can see, very, very simple JavaScript, and putting all of this together is fairly simple. And the code is very, very readable, which I believe is one of the biggest advantages of K6. Any questions so far? Going still alive? This is probably the last time I'm going to ask. Good. All right. So the next thing that I'm going to quickly cover off are metrics, custom metrics, and thresholds. So for a test to be successful, especially if we're talking about service level based testing, we need to be able to actually go and define what we're interested in. And that's where metrics come in. So if we go and run this particular test, you can see that there's this new metrics, my counter, my gauge, my rate, and my trend. If I actually go and have a look at the code, sorry, too many things. It's because it's custom. So basically what we can see is K6 itself defines 4 types of metrics. So if you've done anything like open sensors or open telemetry or things like Prometheus, these are the same sort of concepts. So you've got a counter, counters always go up. You've got a gauge, it goes up and down. You've got a rate, and you've got a trend. So basically you can go and in your test themselves, you can add these things. If you're interested more about the custom metrics that K6 provides, then you can actually go and read that a bit more. So basically the next thing that we really want to do, especially with load testing, is define thresholds. And once again, this is a 10,000 foot, very, very quick overview of what we can do. What I'm trying to show is the kind of things we're trying to do. So while this test runs, let's go and have a look at this particular threshold. So the concept of a threshold is basically you create a check, and we quickly talked about what a check is. So basically, it may be that HTTP 2.0 is used. It may be that the status is 200, and there's content that is present. And every time the check fails, you will get a percentage of the checks that fail. And if you have a percentage of the check that fails, you can say the test fails. Now, this is where the whole software-based load testing really comes in, because you can actually go, well, at load, if I'm not getting the right responses, that matters to me because it means that my server is returning things, my code is not coping with the load, it's returning things it shouldn't do, I've got a problem. And that's where you can kind of identify these kind of issues. And once again, I think this one here will run for a little while. Once again, you can see that the threshold failed. And you can basically then go and get your, that can basically be exported as a test in your test framework, and then you can go and investigate why the threshold is failing. cool. The last bit is so the last bit that we're going to talk about is scenarios. So because we're running fairly, and I'm just going to run the code first and then explain what's going behind the scenes. So scenarios, the concept of a scenario is if you go and write a test, run a lot of tests, what you may want to do is you may want to say something like, hey, I want you to start hitting my login page. And I want to go then after a while, I want to actually go and do more creative or more creative scenarios. So I'm trying to reproduce a bug, and this bug only happens in these particular conditions. So basically what you can see with the scenarios here is you basically define methods using typical JavaScript functions, and then you define how you trigger the scenarios. So scenarios, very, very powerful for load testing because you can try different things. You can see if different combinations of environments will kill you and do things like that. So very, very powerful, and sort of, I've kind of gone very quickly through the various things, but as you can see that, a lot of functionality with very little coding. So I'm not going to go through here. So these are the metric types, so the link is here, but what I am going to go quickly through is how K6 actually works. So K6 has two components. It's written in Go. Tests are written in JavaScript, and then they're basically run using an engine in Go. So as such, one of the things that you'll see is K6 has a bunch of standard libraries that are specific to K6 that you use as you would use any other JavaScript library. However, if you try to go and run something like your Cheerio or your favorite Node.js library, you might find that you won't be able to do what you required, and we're going to talk about that in a minute as well. And the last thing is basically options. So the good thing about this test framework is you can configure all sorts of options. It's very, very flexible. So in terms of writing load testing for your environment and doing a whole lot of interesting CI/CD things, it's got all the bits that you need and want. All right, so next thing I'm going to just quickly show, this is just going to be one of those, it's not read the manual, but it's just one of those demos that didn't work, but it is quite a cool sort of differentiator. So unlike other frameworks, getting data or visualizing the results in K6 is quite easy. You can set up a bunch of different, what they call output providers, and one of them being InfluxDB and Grafana. And you can get good looking dashboards like this that can actually give you a visual representation. So if you're a DevOps expert, you can see at what time the test started failing. You can visualize all of that, which makes these tests very, very developer, not just developer, but also DevOps friendly in terms of, you can run the test and you've obviously got things like Datadog, but you can visualize them, you can actually have a look. So that's really, really cool. I think that's a very, very developer, not just developer, but DevOps friendly sort of thing. All right, extending. So this is one of those demos that's going to fail. As I said, K6 is written in Go, but if you want to go and use your own libraries, what you need to do is basically compile them into ES6, and then run them. So I'm going to show you how that should work, but it's actually not going to work. So the first thing we're going to do is have a look at in my GitHub thing here. What I've got is I've got a ES6 file. So basically, it's it's got the normal K6 things, and then we've got Cheerio and XML2JS. So it looks like, this sort of stuff should work in terms of, it seems like valid JavaScript and things like that. So if we go and try to run that with K6, what we'll get is we'll get this error here. And what it means is that even though it's valid JavaScript, it's actually not ES6. So K6 as an engine doesn't know how to run it. The way we fix it according to the documentation is we go into this and we run a webpack config, and we should get a build, and we get an app build, which we can then basically go and stick and run and run. So this doesn't work, but you can see that it's sort of starting to find the module. And I'm assuming just it's the latest version, there's a bug. I haven't had much time to test it. But if everything worked, the key idea I'm trying to translate here is that if you want to use your normal JavaScript libraries that you love using, you will need to use Webpack to, basically not compile, but convert them to a standard ES6 format, as you would for a front end or anything else. So that's the file. And the last bit we're just quickly going to talk about is one of the things that they have started doing quite well is basically there are limitations with that JavaScript. And essentially what it comes down to is, the having to transcode or code JavaScript libraries into ES 5.1 and 6 is not ideal. So what they've come up with is basically allowing you to go and run these tests using actually adding more functionality at the Go level. So basically, a whole lot of people have written extensions for Go. We're not going to compile these. Actually, we do need to because I don't have it running. But basically, what you can do is you can write your own libraries, or if you don't want to write your own, people are writing things like Kafka and Datadog and things like that. So if we go and back to our client, this will take about 30 seconds. And basically, the other key thing, so the two things, download the XK6 binary so you don't have to deal with the funny bits with Go, and you can build multiple of these at the same time. So without trying to make you Go experts, what you will see is now I have this new K6.exe, which is a new version of K6. And the difference between that version and the version that we're going to try to, so what we're going to do is we're going to run a valid, with the K6 command, we're going to run that. And what we're going to do is it's going to tell us it actually doesn't know anything about the K6 module. So if we quickly have a look at that SQL example, once again, it looks like it's valid JavaScript. What's happening here is extensions. And if we go and basically then, the only difference here is going to be that we're actually going to use our local version of K6. So basically what we've done is we've taken all the goodies with K6 and we've just actually added a couple of extra goodies. And what you'll see is basically now we can run database tests. So by running one simple command, we've got access to things like SQL, we've got things like Kafka, which is actually quite powerful for testing framework because it's not that hard to add new components. So it's pretty cool. So I was going to do a bit more talk, but I just noticed that we're starting to run out of time. So the test lifecycle. So the key thing I'm trying to get across here is that, like any good tools, K6 has a lifecycle, and you define the lifecycle with JavaScript. So you've got inner code. So to use the SQL example, you probably, if you want to do things like set up databases, if you want to set up Redis tables, all that sort of stuff, you can do that setup. And if you want to tear down things at the end, you can close that. One of the cool things that they've done recently that has really, really helped, I believe that it's helped, make K6 even more, even more usable with sort of testing frameworks and pipelines, is they've actually started supporting JUnit as an output. So if we go and run this particular example, and where is it? There you go. And that's fine. Cool. So it's going to do the test and it should spit that out in 10 seconds. And basically what we'll get at the end of it is we will get a JUnit file. So basically you can see it's kicked off this little hook at the end for handle the summary. And basically you get a raw data array and you can format that summary whichever way you want, which I think gives you a lot of power in the way you output the test. And as you can see, you basically get a JUnit compatible XML, which means that if you're using anything like Azure DevOps or any of the standard CI/CD tools, you can get those tests. You can get your load tests to go into a pipeline. So that's pretty cool. I'm I'm just going to quickly talk about config files. We may not run them. So I talked about the options earlier on. So basically, we've got a whole lot of options. So one of the good things is that if we want to start using this as part of CI/CD, we can go and basically have different configurations for test and UAT. And if we want to run this K6 using the same, the only thing we have to change is the config. So as you can see here, basically the only thing that will change is the config file. We can change things, anything you can change normally in the options file, you can do that here. So once again, really, really CI/CD friendly. And I think not only is this tool really, really cool for dev people, it's also very, very good for DevOps people. And it's very easy to take that, anything the dev people have done and put into a CI/CD pipeline, which is quite cool for me. All right. Last little goodie. Essentially, those of you who work with Postman probably know what a Postman collection looks like. So if you take something like this and you export it into Postman, there is a tool that you can go and take your Postman scripts and you can go and convert them to basically, essentially, it will write the tests for you. And you can see basically it's written the sample for you. And not only has it written the sample for you, what it's done, it has actually trimmed a lot of the things like Crypto.js and Cheerio and some of those other useful libraries. So that is quite a useful thing. And if we have a look at that, that test once again, so you will get something that looks like that. So for example, this is the converted version. And as you can see, I haven't done any coding myself. I've just got a Postman collection. So maybe, over the years you've been using Postman. Very easy to convert Postman into a collection. And then we can actually go and run that converted. So let's just say K6 run. And you can see that basically it should work. There we go. And it's going to kick off that scenario. And you can see that just basically, you can see that it's the same one because it's talking to my local host, but I don't have the Docker container running. So once again, a lot of useful tools. And if you ever look at, there's a open API, there's a screen recorder, a lot of useful things. Other things that make life easier, there is this concept of shared array. So if you've got 100 users that you want to give to all of your tests, you can share those. There's really, really good documentation on how to fine-tune an operating system for load testing. I haven't seen any documentation anywhere better on this particular than here. It goes into depth and it's very, very easy. And there's also IntelliSense. So one of the reasons why none of my tests, none of these are thrown in error, even though K6 itself is not a standard JavaScript library, is because I've added the syntax for K6 and I can use IntelliSense. So for example, if I go and import HTTP from K6, and then I do something like an HTTP dot, you can see all of the different functionality. Yes, you need to go and declare. And then you'll get all of the, basically you get the syntax. There we go, that's the one. Let's fix it for me. You can see I'm not, so see basically because I've got the IntelliSense, it's gone brought in, and then I can go and use that HTTP to go and write those tests and things like that. So IntelliSense, really, really good. So last bit is essentially, I quite like to evaluate the tools I use. Is it complex, graspable, repeatable, future-proof, secure, economical, documented, and things like that. I think K6 passes all of that. So what I'm hoping is, that if you're looking at load testing, and load testing always ends up being that thing that's really in the too hard basket, it's, I believe that it's a useful exercise. And what I think, what K6 gives you more than anything else is an easy way of doing testing, but also an easy way of doing relevant testing. And you don't have to worry about a whole lot of things that will prevent you from doing testing. You've got a surrounding toolkit. You can go and take the tests you write and put them in the CI/CD pipeline very, very well, and you can get those outcomes. So that's why I think you should be using K6. And sorry for the 100 miles an hour overview, but I was hoping not to take up too much time. So there you go.
That's awesome. Thank you so much. I think that's actually filled out a ton of content, and it's going to be great for everyone to be able to dig into that and look into it themselves. There was a bunch of questions kind of sporadically coming through there. We've got let's see. Okay, yeah, we had a few here. They're not in order here, so I'll just start at the top. Can you vary the contents and logins for every user? I think you alluded to that right there.
Yep.
Actually, at the end, there's a bit of
so basically
an array that you can throw at it.
Yeah, so basically, if you go read it, I try to keep the examples. We cover quite a lot, and even that was very quick. So yes, so basically, when you set up, you can do two things. One is you can load a JSON array with all your users. If you run through iterations, so there's two ways of running a test. One is you run it on a time base, so you can say run for an hour. The second way is you can say run 10,000 iterations. And one of the things you get in K6 is the iteration. So we'll tell you programmatically, I'm up to number 1 and 2. So if you want to do different users, you just say, modulus of, whatever, how many users you've got, and you can just pick a different user because you get an array. So yes, it's a very common question. Just go and search it. It's being answered.
Awesome. Okay. I think there's two alluding to the same thing. But
That's
the next
good.
question is, does the K6 runner get balanced from cloud instances, or do you need to set that up yourself? I think that
so there's two ways of running.
Apparent.
Yeah. So there's two ways of running K6. So the first thing I showed was just basically on your desktop, download the binary, run on your desktop. The second way is you can run it using their cloud, and their cloud you can specify from which location tests are generated, but it is a paid feature. So I don't use the K6 cloud. I use the local thing because mostly I'm testing Docker containers and things like that. And a lot of the features of the K6 cloud, I can get other ways. So yeah, but I do know that from the K6 cloud, you can choose where the test run from.
Cool. I guess that feeds into the next question. Could the JS library work on cloud functions? I'm assuming they mean AWS cloud functions.
So this is the way to think about it. As long you wouldn't actually run. So what happens is, if you think about it, there's basically a bunch of stuff, and go and read. There is an article. So if you go and read on how the actual engine works, the engine will pick up all the standard K6 libraries that are bundled with the engine. You can then specify extra libraries using paths or HTTP, right? But the key thing about those libraries is they have to be vanilla ECMA script. They can't be Node or browser stuff. So the K6 doesn't know about window, just like K6 won't know about file. So you need to be, that's why you need to go through that step. And that's why I showed you that step where, my compiling didn't quite work, my webpacking. So that's the key thing to think about, is that whatever you want to bundle in, it can be, your JavaScript might be, it might be a library, but it has to be a particular type of library. And they're very, very good at explaining what kind of libraries. I'm not a my JavaScript and Webpack isn't as good, because most of the stuff that I'm doing is I'm just using the standard K6 stuff. And I have given it a go, trying to use external libraries. And as you can see, it's one of those things that I haven't managed to get to work. But it's yeah. But the key thing there is that your JS won't be on the Lambda function or anything like that. It will be a JS you have to grab, because that's what K6 does. It grabs it, it puts it all together, and then it runs it within the Go sort of environment. And that's why you have to download the Go executable.
Okay, cool. Could you potentially never stop the testing to check latencies in specific areas?
Yeah.
So I'm assuming this is more like a polar kind of background thing where you can then see, okay, well, now my user is getting a high latency during a particular time of the day or something like that.
Yeah, so I wouldn't say load testing is a tool for that. I would say synthetic monitoring is a tool for that. So this is load testing will do that. It's, you could potentially use load testing as a synthetic monitoring tool. But the thing to do would be to make sure that you don't overly load test, because then you're creating the load test. So I would see K6 more as a pre-production sort of a thing, where you're trying to figure out, so you know, like as we were talking about the saturation of that long test, you're trying to figure out that, you know, if I get a high spike for 3 hours, is my infrastructure going to fail because I haven't actually scaled my infrastructure right because I'm getting back pressure? That's the way to think about it. It's, yeah, I mean, you could run a small K6, but I would just say limit it to one user, and don't load test your production. That's a key thing, because you don't want to do that.
Absolutely. The other one I think has also been alluded to. I assume you can code with K6 to log in to the site to access internal pages for testing too. So that'd be like a configured scenario to make sure you enter all the required sections and get a token.
Have a look at the example. So essentially, the reason why, remember that thing I had is I had a flow and authentication was going to be part of it, and nothing was working. So that's what I was saying. So if you have a look at the K6 examples, there are very good examples of everything from JWT, OAuth to form submissions. It's all there. So just go have a look. And that's why I really like it as a library. The HTTP client that they've got is very powerful, and all of that sort of auth strategies. You know, it's not really like, it's not as good as Selenium for something. So just be, you know, take it. It is really designed to be APIs and, you know, HTTP requests. So just make sure that you don't overly rely on clicking things, because that's where, you know, and K6 say, look, we're not a browser, we are an HTTP client. So anything you can do with an HTTP client, you can load test, including logging in and using those cookies, and you can set cookies and all that sort of stuff. So yes.
Yeah, a little bit of like the Cypress approach there of the front end testing. You want to do that via your HTTP API instead, as much as possible.
Yeah, Cypress has got a and this is different. Cypress has got a web engine that you can use, and
of course.
You know what they're saying here, you know, and this is where they're honest. They say, look, if you need node modules for your test and you can't convert them to, you know, ECMAScript, or you can't, or you need things to be like, you know, you need a pop-up button to log in, and you can't log in by submitting a form to HTTP endpoint. Well, you can, but, you know, for whatever reason, you know, then that's not a tool for you, because it's not a, you know, you're not going to be able to spin up a live browser. So just be careful with the tests. You know, it's not going to work for everyone.
The next question, I think, is really more about how often you're hitting the particular endpoint test. So the question actually reads, could you simulate interactive typing on an autocomplete, like a bunch of fast requests, then slowing down, then faster again?
Yep.
Yeah.
So what I would do, and actually that was the demo I was preparing. So the demo I was preparing was really around the search engine, because that's where my background is, and how to load test the search engine. So one of the things you commonly use a search engine for is to autocomplete, right? So, and the way you would do that is you basically, and you know, and the K6 recorder play with that will do it for you. So basically, you're just making a bunch of HTTP calls, and what I would do is actually just batch them, and then you can actually go and then choose how many users. So so your function is basically a badge function, you know, and if you're trying to type Andre is great into Google, you know, you'd have your 10 or 12 HTTP calls. And within your, well, maybe not scenarios, you can either use scenarios or you could use the stages. Within your stages, you could say, okay, start off slow. So start off with, you know, 5 seconds and 10 users, and ramp it all the way up to, I'm going to run you for 10 minutes with 100 users to really make sure that autocomplete really works. So that, yeah, that's, as I said, I had a slightly different take on how I was going to make this flow work. I wasn't actually going to cover all that, but the challenge was that nothing was playing nice. So I actually had to kind of stitch together a bunch of vanilla examples, but those examples are really good. So go have a look at the examples, and most of that stuff is covered. And this is not stuff that they haven't thought about. Like, I really like the way K6 documents and the way, you know, developers, DevOps, and SREs can all use it, you know, and I've shown K6 to some of our developers, and they said, great, I can go and do it. I've never shown other tools to developers and said, oh, great, I can I can run it.
Yeah, cool. Have you seen any differences between the open source and cloud? So there's two there on their webpage, I think I saw.
Yeah, so the cloud really is designed, like, I think the cloud really is designed for teams. So one of the things I don't currently have for like you have to kind of, the open source, like the cloud is built with the open source tools. Anything you can do in the cloud, you can actually create your own K6 cloud. They don't hide, right? So they actually tell you in the cloud, we use InfluxDB, and here's how you use InfluxDB. So in terms of features, I don't think there's, they're hiding any features. The key thing really is simplicity. And if you go to your manager, hey, we want to take this on, your manager might say, look, I don't want to run infrastructure. I want just to, you go and write the test. So in terms of portability, you can quite easily take the tests you write and put them in the cloud.
Cool. Last question. Have you done complex user journeys? If so, how did you structure them?
Good. Yeah, good question. So essentially the way, there's two ways, and I think I alluded to before. One is, the simple way is sort of batch. So you can create an HTTP batch. So just say you need to log in, then you need to click there. Let's just use the checkout example. There is actually an example there for doing a checkout from end to end, which basically you log in, then you go and pick a few things, you go and find a few things, and then you go and I think the sample's called Pallium or something like that. You go and grab a few things, you click the checkout button, and off you go. So that's one way of doing it. The way I think I would do it now, given version 30's come out, and now they have this scenarios, I would really use scenarios. So what I would do is I would create individual functions and basically then combine those functions in multiple ways to give that user scenario and make those functions slightly smarter. One of the key things that you may, it's kind of the science of it, because you're not doing unit testing, because you're trying to do load testing, you may want to keep things the same. Otherwise, what happens between your load tests, your things change, and you might say it's a thing. So if you are going to do a complex scenario, just make sure it's the same, because what you want to do is you want to write a complex scenario on your current code and then run the complex scenario on the new code and see if there's any differences. So if your code slowed down by 5 seconds, then that's means something. But if you make it random, too random, so you can't explain away. You can explain away and go, it's because it's 5 requests versus 3 requests. So I think for load testing especially, there is a toss-up between making things complex versus, you are doing step after step. So think of flows rather than what do you call it? Think of flows rather than variability, because that's what your other forms of testing should pick up. So, like, hey, can you place 5 cards? Is it right or wrong? I don't think that's really a load test, because load tests, the way I was structured, I would say 5 items, 6, 10 items, 20 items. So those will be individual tests, and then I will see, because you get comparable results, because the last thing you want to do is get too much variability between the tests that you can't actually say, has your code broken anything or has it?
Absolutely. Okay, we are through the questions. You've done fantastically well. So thank you very much for all that battery of questioning, and thank you for your introduction to K6.
All right.
That's fantastic. Virtual claps.
Thanks.
Big audience clap.
All right. So yes.
Thank you very much. Thank you. All good. And you can see there in front of you, we are also graced by Ashley Davis. How are you, Ashley?
Good, thanks. How are you, Kevin?
Not too bad. Not too bad. Thank you very much for jumping in with this talk. How to start your own open source project. And I hear you're going to be open sourcing something tonight.
Yep. Well, technically it's already open source, but I will publish it on NPM tonight.
Published. Absolutely. That's right. Technicality that I missed there. Excellent. Fantastic. Well, cool. I'll get out of your way and I'll let you take over. Thanks very much, Ashley. Take it away.
All right. Thanks, Kevin. Thanks, Andre. That was a really cool talk as well. I'm going to put K6 on my list of things to investigate. Hi, everyone. My name is Ashley Davis. Thanks for joining us tonight. I'm the author of Bootstrapping Microservices. And I'm happy to say that I will be talking about microservices here on BrisJS next month. So I'll be talking about Node.js and microservices, and I'll be giving away some copies of my book. So please join us again next month for that talk. Tonight, I'm going to be talking about how to open source your own project with a focus, obviously, on JavaScript and Node.js. Now, a bit of background. I was just literally last week, starting a simple open source project. It's really tiny, it's really small. It's a bit of an experiment, a bit of a prototype for me, but it's already useful. So I've already kind of obviously got it on GitHub. But it occurred to me that not everyone necessarily knows how to start an open source project, and that I could, maybe provide some help and some instruction on how to get started with one of your own. Now, you might say, like, why have a talk on this? Like, isn't it just as simple as sticking it on GitHub? And in a sense, yeah, it is that simple. But I'd say also it's a little bit more nuanced than that. And I just want to go through some of the stuff tonight and, just tell you how to make the best go of it and how to present yourself, how to present your code in such a way that it presents you in the best possible light. And I'm also going to give a demo. Obviously, I'm going to demo how to make a new project, how to put it on GitHub. And I'm also going to, we're going to have a look at my new open source project, which is really small. It's really tiny, so nothing to get too excited about. But it's already on GitHub, but we're going to have a look at the structure of that, what I've done there. And I'm going to publish it on NPM, hopefully tonight, if the demo gods let us. All right, I'll just share my screen so you can see my slides. So please feel free to get in touch with me later and have a chat about any of the sort of stuff that I'm talking about. You can see my contact details on each slide. Cool, so before we get into it, let's just define what I mean by open source. And I'm sure everyone knows this, but let's just get it out there in the open. And typically, it's a coding project whose source code is public. The code is made available for anyone to look at. And you can even take a copy of any code that's open source. You can take a copy of that yourself, and you can make your own changes to it, which is really useful. It's really empowered a whole generation of developers, really, and really changed our industry as far as I can tell. And of course, when you make changes to someone else's open source code, you can, as they say, submit a pull request, which basically requests that your contribution be taken into the actual kind of main line of the code, and become that official kind of version of that code. And that's always fun to do. So some examples of open source that you probably know. I would hope you had heard of these. Obviously Linux, Kubernetes, which is something that I use for deploying my backends, and Node.js, which is the runtime that runs JavaScript in the backend. Now, these projects, if it wasn't for these projects, I wouldn't have the career that I have now. So they really did these products, in the lifetime of my career, they have changed the course of my career, and it wouldn't have been possible without open source. Now, here's the thing, right? It can be great to contribute to a big open source project, but it can also be very daunting, especially if you don't have much experience as a developer, or if you're new to open source. It can be very daunting to commit to contribute to a big project. They tend to have these contribution rules that can unfortunately, we do have to have rules to make sure everyone plays nice in these big projects, but they can really alienate new developers. And also the project that you might want to make, or the project that you've got a burning desire that you want to create, it might not even exist. So you might have to start it yourself from scratch if you want to get it off the ground. So we're not talking about today. We're not talking about how to commit or how to start contributing to one of these big projects, or how to generally get involved in open source. There's plenty of blog posts out there on how to do that. I'm literally talking about how to start your own project from scratch. And I'm going to demonstrate. So my new open source library is called Fidget, and I've literally only just started it last week, and there's not much there, so it's pretty easy to understand. And I'm gonna publish that on NPM tonight. Before we get into it, let's look at some reasons why it's good to contribute to open source, and hopefully I can convince you, if you're not already convinced, that it's worthwhile. First of all, it's a great way to get some experience, and that's really important if you're a new developer, looking to break into the industry, and you need to find a way to stand out against all the other people that are going to be interviewing for the same jobs that you're going to be interviewing for. Having your name on an open source project is also a good way to get noticed, especially if the project becomes popular, or if you do end up contributing to a large project, that's a good way to get noticed. It's good for your CV, obviously. Like if you're a new developer, you don't have much experience to list on your CV. Open source coding is a great place to start to get that CV, that experience that you can put on your CV. It's also very, very satisfying to be able to contribute to the community. You know, and this is especially if you use open source, and if you've had a great benefit from open source in your career like I have, you want to kind of repay the favor, and it feels good to be able to kind of give code back to the community. In that vein, it's also simply nice to be part of a community, because coding, like so many other things, is well, at least it can be a very social activity, and it's nice to be in a community working with other people and to be able to have interactions with those people. Now, obviously, you're not going to get that straight away if you're starting your own project, but you can go to one of the big projects for that, or if you're lucky, your own project that you're starting could become a big success. You could attract, it could attract its own community. You could build your own community around your own project. And lastly, you might want to do open source coding simply because you love coding. I mean, that's a good enough reason for me. I'm doing coding all the time anyway. Like I do it, unfortunately, I do it for work and I do it as my hobby. Like when I do coding on the side, I'm not being paid for it or anything like that. I'm often just doing it for fun, learning, or to solve a problem that I've got. I may as well be doing that kind of coding in the open for all the other benefits that I've just outlined. So why start your own project in particular? Now, I've already mentioned that established projects can be pretty hard to get into. They can be a huge, overwhelming code base. That in itself, it can be very hard to get into a big new code base and feel comfortable with that. That can take a long time. But when you start your own project, obviously, it's easy. You're starting like with one line of code probably. So, it's not big. It's very manageable for you. And if it feels like there's any barriers to contributing to these large open source projects, don't let that be an excuse not to do open source coding, because it is just so easy to start your own project. Another reason to start your own project is because the thing that you want to create doesn't exist yet. And if that's the case, and you have a burning desire to build something, then you might just have to start it yourself. That there might not be a project out there that does what you want, for you to go and work on. Or maybe you just want to re-implement someone else's idea because you think you can do it better, differently, or you want it done in some other way. You might remember, if you were watching BrisJS last year, you might remember I did a talk called when to reinvent the wheel, or something like that it was called. And I talked about that kind of thing. It's like when it's okay to kind of, to rebuild something that's already been done, when you want to do that, and it's for your own learning, or you need it done in another way. As long as you have the right motivations and you have realistic expectations about, what's going to come from that, it's as good as excuse as any to kind of start your own open source project. Okay, so this is important. Before embarking on your own open source project, I want you to commit to presenting the best possible version of yourself. Your code and documentation are going to be on display for the world to see. So to the best of your ability, you need to make sure it's the best code and documentation that you can muster. And you have to make your best effort to make your code user-friendly as well, so other people can use it. I mean, so many people just voice their code on the world and you try and use it and it's full of holes, and it's difficult to understand without reading the code how to use it. You can make a really good effort to provide good error messages, good documentation, so that people don't have trouble using your code. But please don't use this as an excuse to procrastinate. Don't let this put you off. Imperfect and out there is better than never sees the light of day. So just remember that you can refine your code as you learn, and there is a broad spectrum of what makes code good or bad. So just don't be afraid to get your code out there. It doesn't have to be perfect, but over time you can strive for it to be the best code that you've ever done. So these are the steps for starting a new open source project, and I'm going to go through these in the demo in a moment, but I'll just run through them quickly first and explain. The first step is very important. You've got to choose a cool name. Actually, don't spend too long deliberating on this. You can always change the name later, and I'll show you how to check if a name's available. I'll show you how to check that in a moment. Then you create your project. Obviously, I'm going to be showing you soon how to create a Node.js project from scratch. Then create a code repository for your project. Initially, this is just a local code repository. It's not something that's on GitHub yet. It doesn't need to go on GitHub straight away. You can hold off, and you can do some initial iterations of coding before you put it, before you make it open source and put it on GitHub. But I say don't wait too long. You need to commit to getting your code out there in the open, and that can be hard the first time. The first time you're trying to make your code public and you're not sure how it's going to reflect on you, that can be hard. But I say just do it. Just get it out there, even if it's not perfect yet. So after you've done some local iterations of coding, you're going to create your GitHub repository for it, for the code, for the project, and then you'll push your code to that GitHub repository. Congratulations, you've got an open source code project. Now, at this point, you may want to do some iterations to tidy up the code, make sure it's well tested, and make sure that maybe you have some small and appropriate amount of documentation online in the form of a README. I'll show you an example of README in a moment. So your code is public now, and say if you're going for a job, a potential employer is going to look at this and they're going to see it, and you want it to paint you in a positive light. So that's really important. And now it's just more iterations of coding, more refinement, more adding of whatever features you want to add, fixing whatever bugs come up. And when you're happy with it, you can publish it. So, once you've got it to that level where, you want to make an official release, you can publish it. For us, we're going to be working with Node.js and JavaScript, so we're going to publish it on NPM. So you can also publish releases on GitHub if you like. And if you're using a different language, you publish it wherever the package manager for that language is. Okay, so now's the bit we've all been waiting for, a live demo. Please start praying to the demo gods for me, and we hope this is going to work out. Let me just find my command prompts. Let's look for a name. So I'm just going to go to NPM, and actually initially I wanted to call my my little open source project is all about configuration. So I wanted to call it Figgy, but unfortunately that name was taken. So I just did a search on NPM to see what was taken, and then I had to rename it. So I came up with Fidget, and Fidget isn't there yet. So unless someone nicks it from me in the next few minutes, hopefully they won't.
Nobody do that, please.
That's all right. I'll name it something else. I honestly don't care.
You trolls.
Okay, so the first thing you want to do when you're making a Node.js project, obviously, is to create the project itself. So I'm just going to make a directory called demo. Go down to that. I'm just working on the Windows here, but you see I've got a bunch of Linux commands, and that's just because I've got git bash installed, and I'm pretty confident with Linux commands, so I tend to use them a lot. Okay, so there's nothing here yet. There's nothing in this directory yet, but if I do an npm init to create my initial project with -y, basically, which non-interactively, fills out all the questions, things that you want to go back and kind of fill out later before you publish this. But that just gives you your package.json file, right? So I can start this in Visual Studio Code now. I've got a package file here. So this tells you what the main file is. I'm just going to create that. I'm just going to create a main file, index.js. And this is the Hello World package. It's going to be a very important open source code project one day. So, nothing too exciting here, but, you want to do a little bit of coding and, check that you can run this, check that it works. The first step after you've created it. So I just created a JavaScript project from scratch here, but I actually normally work with TypeScript, which is a little bit more difficult setup. And I have a template for that I can show you here. I can find it. So if you're interested in TypeScript, on my GitHub, Ashley Davis TypeScript template, I generally just copy this whole project, and I do a find and replace on TypeScript template to whatever I want to call it. This is how the Fidget project started, for instance. So if you have if you do open source projects quite frequently, like I do, it's good to have a little template to start from. That, you know, there's not much boilerplate. If it's just pure JavaScript, there's not much boilerplate. You don't need a template really. So what I'm going to do here in my demo project is I'm just going to do a git init to start a fresh Git repository there. I can look at Git status and I can see the files that I've got ready to be committed here. I'm just going to add all of those. I'll get all this in a git add dot. I'll commit them. You want to have a more imaginative commit message if this was a real project. So I've just created my local Git repo. So I could do something like, you know, hello computer, change that. And you see, like, I'm doing some local iterations of coding here, having a look at what I've done, make sure it works, everything like that. So that's it. That's my local repository. I want to create, probably want to create a, I don't have any dependencies yet, but I'll just to show you this, I will install Node.js, which is a nice little date manipulation library for JavaScript that's compatible, mostly compatible with Moment.js, but a lot less bloated. So let's say I want to do some date manipulation in this project. You know, I get that in. I'm installing this dependency. It's going to be part of the package file now. We can see that if we look at the package file. So you can see my Node.js install is there. Now, if I look at Git status, you can see that I've got the node modules directory. Like if I went and committed this now, I'd get all the node modules committed to Git as well. So we don't want those. So one of the things you need pretty quickly is a git ignore file. If you just type node modules in there, hopefully this does what I think it's going to do. Did I spell that right? That's supposed to be /. Oh yeah, so okay, so I've got the slash wrong. But you can see before we had node modules there. Now I do a git status, there is no node modules. So I've excluded the node modules directory from the Git repository, and now I can do another git add. You'll also notice I've got package.json as well, which I'm just committing as well now. So that's a really important file to get in there into your code repository. So I've done a few iterations of local coding. Let's just pretend that this project does something useful, which it doesn't. But I will show you Fidget in a minute, which does something useful. And let's just have a look at what the next thing is I want to show. Okay, that's good. I do want to show you a README as well, but I'll show you that in Fidget in just a moment. I'm just going to put this on GitHub. So if I go to my account on GitHub, what I can do here is click on, I can find it behind the Zoom window. I click on new repository. Hopefully everyone can see that. Let's call it demo. So good. Don't add any of this stuff here. Like if you want to kind of push up a local kind of Git repo to an empty repo on GitHub, don't initialize it with anything. Just keep all that empty. Create your repository. It gives you some instructions here. I never remember how to do this. I always use these instructions. It tells you that you've got to add your remote to your local repo. So I'm just copying that over. Set up your main branch and then push your main branch to the origin. I'm all set up with SSH authentication here as well, which means I can connect to GitHub and I can talk to GitHub from the command line without having to type in any passwords or anything like that. So I've pushed this project up to GitHub. If I refresh the page on GitHub, if there was a README, which there isn't, you'd see it here. In fact, let's just add a quick README just to see what that looks like. So ideally, you want to README every project. This demo, such a cool Hello World program. This project is bound to be a hit. I imagine that the first person who ever did the first Hello World project had no clue how successful the Hello World line of projects was going to be. Okay, so we'll do git status again. You can see I've got a README here. I'm going to add that. Git commit. Some docs. I'm just pushing that. So from now on, I can just use git push to get my code up onto GitHub. If anyone else makes changes, I can use git pull to bring those down. So we should refresh this now, and we should see that README. So when you write a README, it appears on the front page of the project here on GitHub. It also appears on NPM when you get to publishing it as well. And in fact, I'm just going to go through all the way, and I'm going to publish this demo on NPM, which should just be a step away now. So we might do some more iterations of coding on this before we want to publish the first version. You definitely want to have a look at the package file. We're going to have a look at a different package file for Fidget in a moment that's more fleshed out, and I'll explain it. But let's just push through this for now. I'm just going to give it a real long name and hope that that doesn't already exist on NPM. There's plenty of other stuff you want to look at here. You probably want to look at the version number and make sure that's what you want it to be. I'm just glossing over all that for the moment. And I've already authenticated with NPM. So if I didn't, I'd be doing NPM login, and then I'd be typing in my username and my password for NPM. But seeing as I've already done that and I've already published stuff from this computer, I can just run NPM publish, and fingers crossed, this thing will be on NPM in a moment. Cool. So I would show you that on NPM, but I want to get to Fidget. We'll get Fidget on NPM, and then I'll show you that. But now, if you do want to just get rid of this thing, like I don't want to clutter up NPM with this demo project, so I'm just going to unpublish it. It's going to give me a bit of a warning to say that I need to use force. So I'm just going to force it down. It's just going to say, I hope you know what you're doing. But I do. I didn't want to put that demo project on there really. It's people like me that are cluttering up NPM with all sorts of weird projects. Okay, so that was just really quick. Create a Node.js project, do a little bit of coding. Create a Git repository, do a little bit of coding. Create the repository, an empty repository on GitHub, and then push your project up, and then it's open source. Do a bit more coding, and then finally you're going to get to version 1 or maybe a 0.1 or something like that, and then you publish it on NPM. So let's have a look at the Fidget project. I'll give you a bit of a demo first as well, just to show you what this does. I've got it open already here somewhere. So this is like a real tiny little project that I've only tested on one thing, but it works nicely, and it's got some potential features I want to add still. But it's only this one function, right? That's all there is to it. I made an open source project for this, but the reason is this is a command line tool for processing configuration information, and I hope to use this within my continuous delivery pipeline for one of the projects that I'm working on. And what it does is it basically takes a JavaScript configuration file. Here's my first example. So this is just like a normal JavaScript file that exports and I just lost it. Hit the wrong hotkey and I lost my screen. There we go. Okay, so this is, we're exporting an object here, right? And the object is configuration for a Kubernetes deployment. So normally you do this in YAML. What I wanted to do actually was something like this project. I'll show you quickly. I discovered this project, JSONnet. It looks pretty cool if you're into Python. What it is, it's like a data templating library where you kind of set up some data in Python, and then you configure the data however you want, and then it spits out either JSON or YAML or some other configuration format based on that. So it's like a data templating library. I wanted to make something like this, but I wanted to be able to use it in JavaScript. So this code is JavaScript. You can have any JavaScript here. What I'm doing here is I'm reading in some environment variables. So this is the main reason I want this, right? Is I want to, normally when you're trying to configure a Kubernetes deployment, you can't just kind of pipe environment variables into your configuration file. It all has to be hard coded, which is pretty ugly. So I wanted like a data templating language that I could use to kind of, populate a configuration with some variables. And so far I'm just using some environment variables, just using standard JavaScript there. And I'm plugging those environment variables into my configuration. And then what the actual code for Fidget does is it literally just requires in that JavaScript file. Come on. I'm on my old laptop, you see. my new laptop isn't working properly at the moment and the hotkeys are all over the place. Anyway, so require in your configuration, so you've got some data. And then depending on the command line options, you either output stringify to JSON and output that, or you stringify it to YAML and output that. And so a quick demo of how this works from the command line. So this isn't published yet, so I'm not running this like as a kind of globally installed command line tool yet. I hope to do that in a moment. So I'm running this first example. You can see I'm passing in the first example, and what it's spitting out is an expanded YAML file with my environment variables basically passed into it. So I could potentially use this configuration file for rolling out. I use this one configuration file for rolling out multiple microservices, but they're going to be templated by data. So I can have like one, microservices with different names and images and stuff like that. And that's what this little open source project does. Now, before I publish this, let's have a quick look at the README. So obviously you want to get a nicely fleshed out README. You can hit the preview button up here to kind of preview how it's going to look on the right here in Visual Studio Code. There's not much to it, but there's instructions here on how to install it, how it's going to be run once it's published, and you can like this as a global command line option. There's a trivial example, and then there's a more complicated example here. So just nice bit of documentation that explains how to use this. That's all written in the Markdown format, but you can preview how it's going to look in Visual Studio Code like that. Look at the package file. This package, or this whole project, is from my TypeScript template, and that's why there's a fair bit already in my package.json that just came from the template, and then I've installed a couple of dependencies on top of that, like the library that kind of writes out the YAML file. Now you can Google package.json. It'll give you what you need to kind of set this up, but just make sure you've got your name. That's what it's going to be published as on npm. You've got your version. I usually like to start at 0.0.1. That gives you a bit of scope to kind of change it before you get to version 1, so that you don't kind of set up any false expectations. Like, I'd love to keep backward compatible, of course, with older versions, but just to set the tone that this is sort of an experimental project, and that maybe you don't want to depend on it until it gets to version 1, say. A bit of a description. So the description will show up on npm, I think. And then there's other setup here that's specific to TypeScript. There's some setup here that's specific for it to be a command line tool. So we're going to run this from the command line. It's not like you could use it as an API. You could just require it into another JavaScript code file and start using it as like an API like that. But it's also it's really intended to be a command line tool that I'm going to run in my continuous delivery pipeline. There's a bunch of links here that you want to get filled out to point to your repo, maybe your homepage if you have a homepage for it, documentation, where you go to report issues, things like that. Your email address, just make sure it's an email address that you're happy to go public. This is my public email address, and I put that on all my kind of all my code repos and anything I publish to npm. Make sure it's got an appropriate license. I've just been traditionally using MIT for a long time, but it would default to ISC if you just created this project from scratch. And ISC is like a simplified version of MIT, I think. I'm probably just going to start using ISC actually, now that I think about it. So that's about everything. You can find Fidget on GitHub already. Let's have a look at that. Do I have it open here? Oh, yeah. It's hard to work around these Zoom controls sometimes. Should have had this open already. Where is it? Yeah, I'm not sure where I put the repo for this, but I actually had it in the package file, didn't I? Where can I find it? What? Maybe I never actually open sourced this. Maybe I was actually waiting to do it in this. So let's just try and do it now. Can do the whole thing. Can officially open source this thing live on BrisJS. So type the name Fidget. I'm just making a new repo here, just the way I did before. I'm going to copy the description of this directly from here, from the package file. It's going to be public. That's cool. Not going to have any of that stuff. Now just copy these commands out so I can link my local code repo to my remote code repo on GitHub. Do that as quick as I can. In a moment, that should be on GitHub. Let's refresh this. So there we go. Fidget is online. You can see the README has kind of rendered nicely on the main page of the project here. If you want to take a look at that for yourself, look at my GitHub and look at the Fidget project. So that's it. It's open sourced on live TV, as it were. But I'm going to publish this on NPM as well. So let's just see if anyone's taken my name yet. All looking good. Let's get this one off. Now, because this is a TypeScript project, it's actually going through a pre-build step. In fact, let's just have a look at that in the package.json file. So you've got this field here, pre-publish only. So what it's doing is an NPM test. I don't think there's actually any automated tests on this. It's that simple. It's cleaning the build directory, and then it's running the TypeScript compiler. So it does all that before it's publishing it. And we've also got this npm ignore file here as well. So this .npm ignore file basically controls the things that aren't going to be published on npm. So we don't, particularly here, we don't publish the node modules. Like that doesn't need to be published as part of this. And where is it? Oh, we don't publish the source code. So the source code is TypeScript and you don't need that. So I'm actually as part of the build process, I'm building the TypeScript code to JavaScript, and then it's the JavaScript code that gets published. Let's see where it's at. Something's failed. My linting. You know what? I'm to be honest, I'm just fed up with lint. I'm gonna get rid of this pretest thing here where it's got a lint in it. Sorry if you like lint. Anyone who's listening in and they actually like lint, it tends to annoy me more than I find value in it. I tend to find myself, if I use it, commenting out rules for things that I think should be acceptable, and I can never quite agree with myself on a standard for linting. So this is just running through some tests, but like there's literally one kind of stub test in there from the template. It's not even doing anything. But if that test failed, like if there was actually a real automated test in there and that would fail, that would stop the publication process. So that's really important when you're working on an open source project. You don't want to kind of, and you're investing in automated testing, of course. Cool, that should be live now. It says here version 0.0.1. Let's just do a search. It does sometimes take the NPM registry a little bit of time to catch up. Sometimes it's not instance, but look, there we go, cool, Fidget. So Fidget is on NPM. And I should be able to install that from there using the instructions that I've given myself here. Let's see if I can do that. So I'm just installing that globally. That looks good. I'm not going to go and test that. I'm just going to assume that works. So I will have to test that later because, it is possible to obviously publish broken code. And I don't really have any real automated tests in there yet for this. So who knows what state it's actually in at the moment. That's it. That's it. That's open source project, open sourced on GitHub, live on TV, and published to NPM. Fortunately, without a hitch or without any frowning from the demo gods.
That's awesome.
Cool. So the question is, what comes next? You've started your open source project. What are you gonna do with it now? Well, obviously, just keep going, keep plugging it away at it. Continue the project while it's useful to you, and or continue the project while it's useful to the community. If you get traction with the community and people ask you to keep working on it, and that's what you want to do, that's awesome. If you're done with it, like if you decide to finish up and move on to something else, just put in a bit of extra time to wrap it up nicely so that there's no loose ends. And that it's a good reflection on you as a developer. Put in that extra time to make sure it looks good, basically, and then drop it, move on to something else. There's no point continuing to beat away at a project, that's past its use by date. Like just make sure it's good, useful, and then it's a good reflection on you. And then, regardless of whether you drop it or keep going, just make sure that you tell people about it. There's no point doing open source coding if you don't want to show your code to other people. Don't keep it to yourself. Shout it from the rooftops if you have to. Now, if you do keep going with it, there's plenty still to be done always. Like I like to say that, software is infinite and you can keep extending and upgrading and improving software as long as you can imagine new features that can be plugged into it, right? So, there's no reason to stop if you want to keep coding and keep releasing updates. And if people have issues for you, like if people log issues on GitHub, get back to them straight away. Thank them for their feedback and ask them for more feedback. That it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to fix the bug or fix the issue. And it may not be something you think is in line with the project, or it doesn't benefit the community for the project just to implement this one thing for this one person. But responding to issues and and fixing important bugs, it's all part of the process. And it's actually really good experience, for coding in a commercial environment, because when you join a development team, a lot of the time you're just going to be fixing bugs, right? Like you're going to be fixing bugs on existing software. That's the nature of the game. And fixing bugs in your own open source project is good practice, good experience for that. Responding to issues can also be a good way to attract contributors. So on numerous occasions, actually, I've had someone report a bug to me in one of my projects, and I turn it around on them and I say, would you like to do the fix yourself? Contribute some code and I'll accept the pull request. And this works. Like I've accepted quite a few contributions to my own projects because someone comes along and says, hey, I've got an issue, can you fix it? And you say, like, can you help with it? It's your project too, basically. So it's a good way to get people on board. Responding to issues is a good way to get people on board, but keep doing whatever you need to do to get the word out, shout about it on social media, talk about it at meetups. If you make an open source project, come and talk about it at BrisJS. And invite people to contribute, invite people to come and, make them feel welcome and make them feel like their contributions could be accepted. Finally, you might want to create a website and some more sort of full documentation for it. I've done this on a couple of my own projects. I'll show you an example in a second. You can host web pages like this for free on GitHub, usually under a docs folder under the actual project itself. It's called GitHub Pages, so have a look at that. And you can generate API documentation from your code as well. Now it's a bit tricky to set up. It's not the easiest thing to do, so I don't jump into that too soon, because you'll spend more time writing documentation and tuning your web page for your open source project than you will working on the open source project if you're not careful. So this shouldn't be the full-on website and documentation shouldn't be one of the first things you do. I do have an example to show you. I'll find it. So I made this library called the plot library. Sorry, I'm just trying to work around Zoom controls again here. Or you can find this on GitHub under Dataforge Notebook, the plot library. So it's a simple abstraction over an existing plot library, but designed for simplicity and a forgiving nature, so that you can easily get into it. But under the docs directory here, so I've got doc source. That's the actual source for the actual static web page that gets built for the documentation. And then the docs itself is under the docs directory. This is a GitHub convention. So you basically put a static web page under the docs directory. You can see all the compiled JavaScript there. There's a whole mess of stuff here. The main index file. And then what that looks like actually, this is the live version of that web page. And this is generated by a software called Docusaurus down here. I thought that might be a link down there, Docusaurus. I think it was created by the people at Facebook. It's pretty cool. I haven't even looked into really customizing this. So this is the defaults color theme and all that actually Docusaurus creates for you. And then I'm using, I used to use, I can't remember what it was that I used to use, but it was a bit crap anyway, so I don't want to recommend that. But now what I'm using is tools from Microsoft called, let me have a look at the package.json to remind myself what they're called. Well, it's not in there actually. Where do I want to look? Here we go. If I just go back up to the root directory of the plot library and we look at the package JSON here, you'll see that there's some commands in here for building the docs. So I normally just run this one, this docs command, and that does a whole bunch of crap basically to generate the documentation. But essentially what it's doing is it's using, where is it? I might actually have to look at a package because there's a bunch of like nested packages in this. It's quite a complicated structure for a package. We go down to the package JSON from one of these. I can hopefully show you what I'm talking about. Yeah, so the generation for docs for this particular sub package, it runs TypeScript to actually generate the code, the JavaScript code. It runs this thing called API extractor, which basically generates I can't remember the order of things here, but it generates like at least JSON files that basically encapsulate all your comments and all the good info that it's extracted from the code. And then on top of that, there's another thing somewhere here. I won't bother finding it, but you can look at the code yourself or hit me up on Twitter later if you want to find out more about this sort of stuff. There's another tool that you run then to kind of splice all the docs for all the packages together into like markdown files. And then from there, you run the Docusaurus static site generator. And that's where you end up with a static site like this. But underneath that, actually, let me find it again. Underneath that is the API docs. So this kind of lists all the packages and any examples that you've got marked up in the code. It just pulls them out and kind of formats them quite nicely. And, you know, it's got all the interfaces and it's all linked together so you can kind of follow around and see what's happening. So this is the kind of thing that you don't want to do straight away when you're getting into an open source project, because you can sink a lot of time into configuring and learning out how to build documentation like this. But it's really worthwhile if you've ramped up on a project and you've got a community around it, and you know people are asking you how to use it and stuff like that. You can point them at the docs. Cool. So just to wrap up, anyway, it's just the list again of things to do to start your own project. Choose a name, create your initial project, create a local code repository, do some coding, push it to GitHub. You know, it's open source at that stage. Work on your docs. Keep coding and publish it, and then just iterate. Keep coding, publish it. Keep coding, publish it. All right, that's about all I've got for you. If you want to grab a copy of my book, there's a link there, and there's a discount code. That's a discount code for 40% off. If you can't wait, if you can wait a month for the next time I'm talking, I'm going to be giving away some copies for free. But in the meantime, if you can't wait, please feel free to make use of that discount. Thank you for listening.
Generous discount. Thanks so much. It's been a fantastic talk, and we definitely do still have a couple of questions that we can go through. So I'll just take it from the top. What are some ways to really ensure that what I'm trying to do doesn't already exist? I might not see it in NPM or GitHub, but it might still be out there. I guess, well, like you were showing, you're doing like an NPM search there. So what if it still exists?
I mean, there's not much that isn't on Google these days, right? So Google is the place to go to look to see if something already exists, because, you know, you might not believe this if you've only come on the scene recently, but GitHub isn't the only place to do open source coding. So there's Bitbucket, SourceForge. You know, there's been a bunch of places. I used to do coding on Code Project, if anyone remembers that. Yeah. There's a bunch of places to look to see if stuff exists, but usually, you know, you can just get to all that through Google. Sometimes it's just a matter of knowing what to look for. Like the thing that you think you want to create, like it might have a different name to other people. So, I mean, the only way that you can figure out, you know, what other people call the thing is that you want to make is just by doing research and just, you know, following a thread of leads basically to find that out. But yeah, certainly if you're trying to get something on JavaScript out there, the first place to search is NPM.
Absolutely.
Yes. But also,
is it frowned upon to have? Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, don't be afraid to re-implement a project. Like, you know, like I said in that talk last year, reinventing the wheel. It's perfectly okay to redo a project if you want to do that for learning, or if you've just got some burning desire to, like, you think you can improve on what already exists. You know, at worst, you're only wasting your own time by making something that, you know, already exists. So just go ahead and do it.
No such thing as a waste of time. Yeah, so is it frowned upon to have a private repo first, stabilize, and then make the repo public once confident? That's the question.
There's no wrong way to do this. Like, I've done that before. Like, I think my first open source project, going back to, about 2011 or something like that, I sat on that for a few years before I open sourced it. It wasn't meant to be open sourced originally. I mean, that's really why. And then I got to the point where, I think I'd hope to make a business out of it, but I'm a lot more business minded now than I used to be then. But then I didn't have a clue, so I was just sitting behind my computer and coding, and I made something that was interesting, and I ended up open sourcing it. But I would say now, to anyone who's listening, if you have the intention of open sourcing it, just do it as soon as you can. Like don't procrastinate, don't sit on it. Look, it could be a case that you're in the same situation and you think you keep it private. Don't keep it private just because you want to perfect it. That's never going to happen. It just needs to be good enough to go out there and do that early. Do that early and show how you work. Show your process. But if you think you're sitting on a business idea, you want to keep it private, and then you decide to open source later. Do it however you want to do it. There's no right or wrong.
Makes perfect sense. Good advice there. I think this is back to the answer we previously had. People clashing on names. Should I be looking at other languages, package search tools to make sure I'm unique? So Go, I guess, and
there's different ways you can do this, and I think GitHub has a package manager you can use as well. Obviously you can make, if it wasn't going to be open source, you could have a private NPM registry. You can also put an organization name. I've had to do this on a couple of occasions. Put an organization name. It's like, at organization / the project name. So if you've got name clashes, you can make up your own organization. Like I've got Code Capers. So I made an open source project a year ago, or something like that, for dependency injection. I wanted to call it Fusion. Fusion was taken, so I called the project at Code Capers / Fusion. So it doesn't really matter. Like, it doesn't really matter what the name is, right? Also, like, I have actually taken names that people were squatting on, like on 2 or 3 occasions now. So if you see a name on NPM that you like, they're changing the rules on this, by the way. So if you do want to do this, you're going to have to wait at the moment, and you have to stay tuned to see what the new rules are. But that only came about like in the last month. Before that, like, you could basically contact NPM support on their support email, or log an issue on the NPM website. And then when they reply to you, then if you can find the package maintainer's email, you can CC them on them and say, like, you haven't published this in 10 years, whatever. Like, there is stuff out there that is like really old. Like, I got one just a couple of months ago that hadn't been published for 7 years, right? And sometimes the owners never get back to you because they don't have the email or the account or anything anymore. Sometimes they, like this guy that I got the package off last time, he got back to me and said, I completely forgot that I had that, and said it's completely okay that you can have that name. So normally what will happen is if the package maintainer gives up the name, it's yours. Otherwise, if they don't respond, or if they're not using it, then the NPM support team would basically just take it off them and give it to you. So it takes some time. It takes like 6 to 8 weeks to fully go through that process, which isn't long really if you're going to get a good name out of it. But then obviously, you shouldn't squat on that name as well. Like, you shouldn't squat on that name and not doing it with it. You should obviously put a good open source project on it and then keep updating it.
Absolutely. This one's an interesting question. Is Creative Commons popular in the open source code project world? So I think that's in reference to the fact that you were looking at different license types there as well.
Yeah, I'm not a legal guy. I used to use, back when I was on the code project and doing projects on there, I used to just use the code project open license, until someone pointed out to me that there were some restrictions with that on how they could and couldn't use it. And they asked me if I could relicense using MIT. And this could have been 10 years ago. It was a long time ago. And so since then I've been using MIT because it's just a real short license, no restrictions. It sort of indemnifies you. It says that if someone uses your code in a way that it wasn't intended to be used and that causes harm, then it's, they can't hold me liable as the author of that code. it just gives people, free reign to do what they want with the code, as long as they, accept whatever repercussions come from that. And I've just been using that without thinking about it really for a long time. And then I only really I always just go through the process of creating a new project if I use that npm init-y, and I just change ISC to MIT. But when before I was doing this, when I was preparing for this talk, I thought, like, what's the ISC license all about? I didn't even know. But then I went and had a look, and I had a look on Wikipedia, and it's basically just seems to be a simplified version of MIT. So it's not much different to what I'm using, and I'm probably actually just going to start using that in the future, because that's the default for GitHub now.
Cool. So I guess it's like, your mileage may vary a little bit. Go have a look at your intent and purposes.
Yeah, that's it. Everyone needs to look at how they, what they want to do with it, and what they want to achieve out of the license. And obviously, if you're working for a company and they're letting you do open source, which is a really privileged position to be in, I think. But if you're in that situation, obviously you've got any license you want to use, you've got to run it by the legal department in your company, and depending on who your company is and how much red tape there is, that could take some time. But obviously, you can't just go ahead and pick whatever your license you want. If you're representing your company and doing open source coding, you have to kind of go with what the company wants.
And even if you're doing your open source projects, but you're a career software developer, you may have things in your contract that say that everything belongs to the company. So you always have to get an open source contribution clearance from your company before you start a new open source project. So it's worth thinking about.
Something to be aware of for sure. I mean, I always made a lot of times. Not just open source coding, but I never really wanted to kind of have a company that I worked for interfere with my side projects, or I give a lot to companies that I work for, but also I want my own kind of clear space to be able to do my own stuff, and I always take care to make sure that it's not in any kind of competitive interest to the company or anything like that. So, but when you're going for a job interview, you can ask about that. You can, straightforward, or even better, you've got projects out there because you didn't procrastinate. You got your open source. You didn't sit on your private open source project for years or whatever, like I used to do. You've got it out in the open already, so you can say that's there. If you want to accept me into your company, you have to accept that I'm working on this kind of thing, and that you hiring me is akin to like allowing me to continue doing that. So it's part of the conditions of joining a company that you'd be allowed to do. Not on company time, of course. I'm not saying that you just go and work on company time. It's always on your own time, unless you have working for a company that has a specific policy around that. Mm.
And it's usually something that's looked upon really favorable. So you want to make sure that kind of thing is encouraged wherever possible as well.
Yeah,
somebody just wrote in to say congratulations on the open sourcing.
It's not a huge event to me because it's only a tiny little open source project, and I've done a couple of hundred of these by now. But for anyone else, like open sourcing your first tiny project, it could be a huge event. Obviously, you're probably a little bit worried that people are going to be looking at your code and what are they going to be thinking, but don't worry about it. Just get it out there, and or everyone's code is dodgy in some way. So you probably if you're caring about that sort of thing, you're probably doing better than most.
That's a really good point to consider. There's one point here. I think this is good actually. Can you automate dependency security updates for your package? So I guess in the approach of trying to reduce your maintenance overhead of being an open source maintainer, is there anything you can do to try and make sure that if you've got all downstream dependencies, upstream dependencies to make sure that you're consuming all the security updates and that you're not passing on any existing vulnerabilities?
To a certain extent, GitHub already does that. So I don't know how it works. I don't know how they do that magic, but it kind of tells you it submits pull requests for things that you need to update, and every so often when you're working on a project, you should update obviously your versions. You can use npm outdated command and npm update to help you do that. I don't suggest updating everything at once though. Like it's much better. It's not too bad if it's a small project, but if it's a big project that's been around for a while, and you want to update dependencies, just make sure you do them one at a time and that you test after each one. Otherwise, you can get yourself like in a hell of a mess with things not working anymore. But, you know, like if you have a continuous delivery pipeline for your project, like I do for, I've got an open source project. I open sourced my authentication backend as a microservice a couple of months back, and I've got that set up on GitHub. It's, you know, I've got GitHub Actions set up for the CD pipeline. When you commit code to that, it runs the full set of automated tests. It could easily run some sort of, you know, security checks to kind of, you know, test for, you know, what's in the dependencies, whether they need to be updated. I didn't do that, to be honest. I've never even really thought about doing that, but you could put that in as part of your CD pipeline, that, you know, if there is some known security vulnerability, that you blow up the build, and, you know, you get an email that, you know, something needs to be looked at. At the moment, I just have that running through the tests, doing a Docker build, and then pushing a new Docker image up to Docker Hub. But if you've got automated builds, you can do anything like that, like anything you can think of, like convention testing is a good one that I've heard of. You probably do something with like load testing, like what Andre was talking about, to kind of, you know, stress test your code if you wanted to.
Yeah, and there's like you can run the npm audit command, and that will try and tell you about all the different upstream vulnerabilities. So that's definitely something that's worth doing, and making sure that's part of your pre-deploy, like you highlighted.
That's going to be part 2 of this talk, which is how to continue and maintain your open source project.
Absolutely. Launching, that's great. You know, afterwards, that's all the work of maintenance. That's absolutely true. Fantastic. And that's through all the questions. You know, cool. Folks out there watching at home, please make sure you enter the for the Quokka license as well. Make sure we get some more answers in there. But thank you, Ashley. That was fantastic. That was so good. Thank you.
And I'll put the slides online later, so, you know, if you missed out on the discount code, we'll make that available anyway. So
wonderful. And congratulations again on the new book.
Oh, thank you. Thanks everyone for listening.
Awesome. All right. Let us just quickly jump into final slide while I say goodbye. And there it is. That's just a few links, reminders of exactly how you can get in touch, and you know, anything about BrisJS. So yeah, while we're here, I can just sort of remind everyone, we absolutely need your contributions. Wonderful talks like this. You've been able to see some great examples there of exactly what to do, and you know, if you want to be able to contribute, even a very short talk, you know, sub 10 minutes is in what we call a lightning talk. If you've just found something cool, or you think there's an excellent new tool that you'd like to, well, that you've open sourced, or that you've been able to make great use of, and would like to demonstrate it to everyone else, that is a fantastic idea. So it doesn't have to be a grandiose, massive endeavor. Very short talks, you know, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, 30-minute kind of blocks is really what we're about here at BrisJS. And you know, by putting it in there, you can always get feedback in our GitHub issues, and you know, open source that feedback cycle to be able to get your contributions to BrisJS. So it really helps us schedule in the future, and make sure that we can get the announcements out a lot quicker as well, get everyone's scheduling lined up, and things like that as well. So we've got plenty of openings for, you know, after April. You can book all right ahead to the rest of the year. So don't hesitate. I look forward to hearing from everyone, and I hope you found tonight and its wonderful speakers here very useful. Make sure you tell everyone about BrisJS. Subscribe if you're not a subscriber, and we'll be in touch with further live streams, and hopefully in the future also some details about when we're going back to in-person events as well. Thank you very much for everyone's attendance, and your questions, and your wonderful participation on the chat. And we'll leave you for tonight. See you next month.